you in some sense. So my name is Jaya. Hi. And you can just go around with just, since it's a small group. Hi everyone, I'm Ari. Yeah. That sounded like hi Ari. Hi everyone, I'm Kishore.
I'm Grudge, even though I didn't introduce myself before I started, so sorry about that. I'm Mr. Rani. Grudge and Grudge, come whenever you want to.
I'm Samuel.
Hi,
And
Hi everyone, I'm May.
everyone up on Yeruda. I'm Ross. Okay, thank you all for coming. I forget the name of this presentation, even though I gave the name, but I forgot what I called it. Does anyone remember something about becoming whole? I totally forgot. I know the subject matter I'm gonna cover, but I forgot how I titled it.
Give me 1 second, I'll tell you. We called it Sacrifice Makes the World Go Round.
Yeah, sacrifice makes the world go round. This is in contradistinction with the often told love makes the world go round, or money makes the world go round. So we want to present a different perspective about what really makes the world go round, or what maintains a circle of life. And it's not love, and it's not money, but it's sacrifice. And of course, we may have to explain what that means, because many of us, I suspect, have watched way too much occult television. So when we hear the word sacrifice, you think of like a bloodletting. Or something a little bit crazy like that. But the word sacrifice, I looked it up about a half a year ago. And if you look up the word sacrifice, the etymology of it, it means what makes something holy. And the word holy, so I looked up the word holy because millennials were not comfortable with that word either. And so the word holy means what makes something whole. So sacrifice is that which makes something complete or whole. That is the meaning of sacrifice. So sacrifice in one sense can be translated in the context of the Gita, which we're going to be covering. Sacrifice can be translated as wholesome action. So wholesome action is what makes the world go round. But when we say wholesome action, we don't just mean the action that we like to do. Or just like they have this term now, is very popular, self-care. Self-care is like a real popular term. And it basically means you go to the spa, get your nails done, get your hair did. And that's wholesome action. But that is action for you. So that is not actually what maintains the relationship that we have with others, the relationship with the world. As we'll see in the Gita, even the relationship with something, a higher order of reality. But rather, the word sacrifice is intending the meaning that to offer or to give back something. Because you're taking something in your relationship with others, in your relationship with the environment, and indeed, even though we may not be aware of it, in our relationship with a higher order of reality, which is invisible, we're taking something, and what are we giving back? So when you take something, then the something that you're taking from, in a sense, is less than before. And so the sense of yajna, which is the word we're going to be covering, or sacrifice, is to offer back to keep it whole. You understand this? You can kind of get a picture of it. Just like a cheesecake. I like to use cheesecake. Now, suppose I have a table of cheesecake is there. So if I take a slice or 2 or 3 or 4, because it's cheesecake, then it's going to be less in number. And so suppose there's like a group of us who all went to cheesecake, but I took a little bit more than my share. So it's less for everyone else. So it creates a tension in the environment because of that. So that the sense of sacrifice is that you're able to offer back the cheesecake, so to say. Obviously not literally, but I'm just using that as a visual by which you can access the concept itself. You offer back the slices of cheesecake in order to keep it whole. And then when it's whole, then there's harmony in the environment, harmony in your relationships with others, in your relationship with the environment, and indeed in your relationship with a higher order of reality. Or say it in the opposite way, the reason why our relationships are eroding or deteriorating in this postmodern world. You've noticed that our relationships deteriorating? all over the place, right? People getting divorced, breakups, our relationship with each other in the country deteriorating, our relationship with other countries deteriorating, our relationship with the environment is out of control. Why is this happening? So if you were asked the Bhagavad Gita, the reason this is happening is because there's a lack of sacrifice happening on the part of the individuals who are taking part in these relationships. They're taking something without giving back. And as a result of that, they're experiencing a split between themselves and the environment or the whole that encompasses them. And this way, they're suffering. Anyone here suffering? Suffering? Oh, okay. Samuel's doing good, but but the rest of us are experiencing some suffering. So we may look to this element of sacrifice for why that may be the case. Okay, so that's kind of a summary of the ideas I would hope to cover. Any questions? My presentation's over. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so let's start here. I wanted to give a fuller reference point for this idea of wholesomeness. And we want to start with this idea. Why is there existence instead of no existence? Have you ever thought about this? It's quite a fascinating question to ask yourself. Existence, like consciousness, is one of those aspects of reality that resists empirical scrutiny or empirical conclusions, right? Why is there, for example, how do you explain the existence of consciousness and self-awareness, especially in a mechanistic worldview where we're considered just as chemicals helplessly acting under the laws of nature? Why is not all this happening in the dark? Why there should be awareness of that whatsoever? So it's one of those aspects of the scientific paradigm that is also not able to explain or resist explanation, or at least easy explanation, conclusive explanation, right? But even, isn't it? Do you agree with this? To some degree, you agree. You may have observed this. But even more fundamental to the consciousness itself is existence. Why is there existence instead of no existence? Have you ever thought about this question? Existence is itself a miracle, or more than a miracle, it's a mystery. Why there should be something instead of nothing. And I think in our generation, we've forgotten how to ask these sorts of, we've forgotten how to ask questions in general. We don't believe in questions in our generation, we only believe in assumptions. But if you allow yourself to inquire, this is a question that normally doesn't come up in the modern psyche. Only questions about euphoria are prominent. Euphoria, is it? Yeah. Euphoria is a new TV show on the Netflix, I suppose. Very popular. Only reason I know, I haven't seen it because I'm spiritual. The only reason I know is when I was on pilgrimage in Vrindavan, all my friends were talking about euphoria. I was like, what is euphoria? We're in a holy place for pilgrimage. Everyone's talking about euphoria. So I was like, what is euphoria? So they informed me, some TV shows there. So they have lots of questions about this, the euphoria. But why should there be a euphoria instead of no euphoria? Why there should be an existence instead of no existence? So have you ever thought about this question? Has it ever come up for you? What is your answer to this question? Anyone has an answer to this question? Why is there existence instead of no existence? Yeah, your silence is the answer. And so far as I mentioned, that this is a part of reality that resists empirical scrutiny. If you have to use your mind and intelligence, which is part of the empirical world, for something that may transcend empiricism, then your empirical faculties don't have easy access to an answer to a certain question. So at least for the world of old, and especially for the Bhakti tradition, the Vedanta tradition that we promote here at Bhakti Center, God is really the ground of existence. He is the ground of being. And out of that ground of being is emerging nature and consciousness, and all the things that exist are emerging from that very ground of being. You can say He is that primordial wellspring of existence, and He donates, in a sense, His existence to all other things that exist. I just want to give this definition as a working definition for God, because as I mentioned in many places, God is mostly thought of as sky daddy. You know, God is a sky daddy. He's like a God of nature that you're to propitiate yourself, supplicate yourself to get things in this world. And that is usually the presentation of God that we hear in the world over. even for people who are theistic, they kind of think of God as sky daddy. So what we're offering is a different definition of God. He's not sky daddy, but he what's the word for like pre-existing before? I'm looking for a word. He exists before there's nature itself, before there's a sky, and before there's a concept of a daddy. He's existing before that, and he's donating his own existence or being to all the things that spring up out of that wellspring of being. Can you picture that a little bit? I'll give a different example, what is given in sacred text. The example given in sacred text is like an earthen clay pot. So the earthen clay pot is coming out of the earth, right? And it also rests on the earth, and then it is into the earth that it returns in the end, right? Can you picture that? So it's like, and it's existed for some time, and then it disintegrates, it returns to the earth. So God is like that grounded being from which everything emerges, in which everything is resting, and into which it returns at the end, at the dissolution of things. This is kind of the definition of God that is often in sacred text. Can you follow that imagery a little bit? Is it okay? Okay. So far, so good. You don't have to accept it. We're just doing this to give you a context for it. Don't mind my alien-looking drawing there. Looks like an alien with two eyes, but I promise you it has a meaning to it. Where are the markers here? So I wanted to share this this is a mantra that comes in the scriptures, characterizing or discussing what is this primordial existence. And it says there, Purnam Ada Purnam Idam, Purnam Purnam Udachite. So it says Adaha means the root of being. Whatever you think that is, if it's a Big Bang or whatever it is, the root of being is Purnam. The word Purnam means complete, or the word Purnam means wholeness. The root of being is whole, and that which comes out of being, Idam. The word Idam is like a pronoun. It means this. It's like in 20th century, we have pronoun issues now, right? I don't know pronoun issues, but everyone puts their pronouns in their bio now, and some of the pronouns are very interesting. They, them, they, their. It's a little bit hard for me. I'm a little old, so it's a little bit hard for me to get on board with the they and the zers a little bit. I've seen the tree self one. That one is really hard for me. I can't really do the tree self one yet. But it looks like there's a pronoun issue through and through in the sacred text also. So in the sacred text, you'll see that they often use pronouns to describe reality, so you don't know what they're talking about. And so if you look at the commentaries of these different sacred texts, they give different purports to what each pronoun means. So anyway, I'm just saying that because the word idam just literally means this. And I looked at 3 commentaries on this. I did 3 commentaries on this, and there were 3 different commentaries saying that this means this, this means this, this means this. So it looks like a pronoun issue is always on the table for humans. In any case, adaha is the root of being. It is complete. And that which emerges from the complete, that is also complete. So in one of the commentaries, and one that I'm going to follow for this presentation, the word idam, this refers to the world around us. So this is also complete. So you can think of the word ada as cause. It is the cause, the first cause of everything. So the first cause of everything is whole. And that which emerges from the first cause, or this, the effect, which is this world, which is consciousness, that is also whole. So the cause is whole and the effect is whole. Purnam Dakate, this, the effect, comes from the cause. So the whole that is the effect comes from the whole that is the cause. So far, so good. This is a little philosophical. I promise it's going to get easier, but this is the first part of the presentation. So far, so good? Yeah. Okay, so what is this picture intended to show? So there's a word that I came across recently in my own personal reading. I'm trying to read 50 books by the end of the year. So I'm on my 11th book right now. And I came across one interesting word called a holon. I promise you this is a real word, it seems now. So the word holon refers to a whole that is composed of parts that are themselves whole, albeit on a lower level. Should I say that again? A holon is a whole, not H-O-L-E, W-H-O-L-E. A holon is a whole that is composed of parts that are themselves whole, albeit on a lower level of being. So for example, from the picture, So my alien picture is starting to like crystallize, right? So you have here, this is a whole, right? Composed of parts, right? And the parts are themselves whole, but on a lower level. And this part in relationship to this whole also has parts. And those parts are whole on a lower level of being. And then those wholes, they are also composed of parts that are themselves whole, but on a lower level of being. Does that make sense? So you have here, and this is also a word, this is a very interesting word. A holarchy. I'm probably saying it ghetto too. Like I actually tried to I went to the Webster dictionary to see how it was pronounced. And the computer sounded ghetto too. So I was just like, I don't know how to say this word. But holarchy is like a hierarchy composed of wholeness, or wholes that are having parts that are themselves whole, but albeit on a lower level. So you have what they call it inclusion hierarchy, right? It's a hierarchy is here, right? There's a hierarchy that's here, but it includes the superior or the higher order of wholeness includes within it this lower level of wholeness. So they call it as a holarchy. Yeah, a holarchy. Is it so far so good? This is a little bit, okay. It's not too confusing, right? Okay, so now we have this holarchy. Oh, a good example of this is the Russian dolls. Anyone know what the Russian dolls? What they're called?
Russian nesting dolls.
They're called nesting dolls?
Russian nesting dolls.
Why are they called nesting?
They nest within each other.
Oh, okay. Oh, okay, cool. You know what? Another thing they call inclusion hierarchy is a nested hierarchy. Oh, okay. It's all coming together now. So the Russian dolls is a good example of this existence of a holarchy and existence itself. Okay. So with that in mind, what do we learn about this holarchy? What do we see here? Well, for one thing, number one, I should probably write this down. Let me. Sorry. I'm a one-man show here. Okay, so the first thing we learned is that the parts literally exist inside the whole. This is the first thing that we learn about this holarchy. And that the whole is more than the sum of its parts. Can you see this? So the whole is also more than the sum of its parts. So it has properties that the wholes or the parts themselves don't have. So in other words, if you were to just study only the parts of something, you still wouldn't have a complete understanding of the whole thing. So although the parts are included within the whole also has properties that the parts don't have. And it's more than the sum of the properties. So far, so good. The other thing, and this is a really important point for my presentation, the parts don't have any direct relationship to each other except through the relationship with the whole. Now, this is a very important point for the rest of my presentation. This is the main point that I want to bring up. Just like, and this is going to be, I'm going to give two examples for this. This is a really good example. Let's take a yellow lotus flower. You know what a lotus flower is? Let's take a yellow lotus flower. What are some of the qualities of the lotus flower? A yellow lotus flower. What are some of the qualities?
Yellow.
Yellow, thank you.
Flower.
Flower, okay, that's a name. A name, that's a quality.
Petals.
Petals.
Grows in the dirt.
Grows in the dirt, okay. Okay, yeah, all these are right answers, but unless you say what I'm thinking in my head, it doesn't count. So a lotus flower, yellow is a quality, shape is a quality, scent is a quality. So these all have relationships with the yellow lotus flower, but they don't have relationships to each other, right? Their relationship is through the substance that encompasses them. They don't have a direct relationship to each other. Does it make sense? A shape doesn't have a direct relationship to scent. In this analogy, except through the lotus flower itself. So the relationship is through that whole that encompasses them. Another example is the actions that you do in the morning. When you get up in the morning, you brush your teeth, you take a shower, you eat some food, you read the newspaper. Well, for us, check our Instagram, and so on. These different activities, they have a relationship with you, the one substance that encompasses all of them, but they don't have a direct relationship to each other. You understand? Can you picture that? So with that, just leveraging that imagery for this point that's being brought up here, in the holarchy, the parts, they only have a relationship to each other in relationship to the whole, but they don't have a direct relationship to each other. They can relate to each other with the whole that encompasses them. Okay, so far so good. Okay. Now, why I'm saying all this this is just like a preamble to what I want to say. Taking that this major whole is the first cause, or it's God. Let me just use the word God. I know God is like a 3-letter curse word, but we're gonna stick with it. What's another word for God that's like
Divine.
oh no, absolutely not. I don't do
Source.
Oh my God, source. I don't know if I could do source. My mom used to always call God source, so I'm like triggered by that. You know, source. I'm gonna stick with God. It fits my personality, which tends to be triggering and kind of agitating. So we have God or source or the divine, whatever you want to call it. And you have the things that are coming from source, the effects. One of the effects is ourselves, right? So we are the parts who are ourselves whole. We are also whole, but we're whole in relationship to a greater whole. And since we are the effect of this greater whole, we don't have direct relationships with each other, minus the whole that encompasses us. Can you picture this? I'm saying this to say that when the parts try to relate to each other without their acknowledgement of the whole that encompasses them, then it doesn't work out. So this is a critical point for the presentation I'm trying to do. Does it make so? Yeah. How many of you have been in relationships before? Like more than one, more than two, more than three. I'm not making fun. Okay. More than 10. Okay, of course, this is not to like bring up bad feelings or anything like that, but to say, why is it that these relationships keep disintegrating in the world? Because, and this is related to the point that we're trying to establish, it's because the parts, we are the effects of a greater whole. That's what I'm trying to say. We're parts of a greater whole. We are ourselves whole, but we are also part of a greater whole. And we don't have a direct ability to relate to each other without the support of that greater whole that encompasses us. So when you try to establish a relationship with another part without acknowledging the greater whole that encompasses you both, whether that's you and another partner, or it's you in the environment, or it's you and any object in this world, then that relationship is not able to maintain itself. It starts to disintegrate by nature. Is it, you can follow that line of reasoning? We can discuss it afterwards. Okay, another couple of points. Is that a mean point? That's a solid point, right?
Mm-hmm. It is. I had a question though about it, which, and maybe you're going to get to this later, which is what that acknowledgement looks like.
Yes, that's actually part of my presentation, what that acknowledgement looks like. Thank you for that question. One other thing about this, the nature of the parts, it seems, is twofold. The one-fold, twofold. So do you say one-fold? I don't think that's how you say it. The parts have a dual function. The first function is to preserve and assert its individuality as some sort of quasi-autonomous whole entity. In other words, we try to live our own lives in other ways. The second function of the part is to also acknowledge that they are meant to serve the greater whole that encompasses them. This is a dual function. So the first function is like a self-assertive function. And the second function is like an integrative function. And so you have to live your life, you're trying to live your life in this world. That's the self-assertive part. And you have to also acknowledge that there's a greater whole that encompasses you, and you have to serve that part. That's the integrative part. Even if you bring it down to something very practical like society, you live in your own life within a society. That's the self-assertive part. You live your own life. And there's a part where you have to acknowledge things within the society itself also. You have to pay bills, for example. You have to, when you're in the street, don't act ghetto. And, there's a different social standards that are there that are integrated. You're realizing that I'm part of a greater whole, and I have to acknowledge that greater whole that I'm a part of. So an integrative function. So how do you bring the self-assertive and the integrative function together in such a way that it's harmonious? And you don't feel like it's like a imposition of your being, at the same time you're acknowledging the greater whole that encompasses you. And that is where the word yagya comes into play, which is the purpose of my presentation. Is this okay? I'm gonna erase my alien head here. I think it's service.
You want a national?
Yeah, that would be cool. In the meantime, so coming back to what I was describing in the beginning of the presentation. Thanks. So we want to discuss this word yagya. You heard this word yagya? You can say that after me, yagya.
Yeah.
So the word yagya means sacrifice or it means offering. And you first encountered this word in the Gita in chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita. Arjuna is trying to understand how does he perform activities that don't entangle him and bring his life down? Because that is a very hard question to answer. I'll put the question forward to you also. How many of you are doing activities that you find increasingly entangling and kind of bringing you down a little bit? I remember my life was so good until I got my first iPhone. And after I got my first iPhone, it was like, and I tried to like pick it up a little bit. Because I lived in a monastery for 13 years, and so I just didn't really have a phone. And then I moved to New York in 2017. And the first 6 months, I didn't have a phone, so I was extremely difficult to get in contact with. And I started working for the Bhakti Center, so they kind of needed to be able to reach me. And they could email me, but I may get to it, I may not get to it. I mean, it's still kind of like that today, honestly. But I don't know. So yeah, so then finally I capitulated and I got an iPhone, and then quality of life started going down because that's the nature of activity, actually. One activity leads to another, you get increasingly entangled, your life is brought down. So the first place where this word yagya comes up is an answer to a hypothetical question by Arjuna. How do you engage in activity in such a way that it doesn't erode the quality of your existence? Which is a very good question to ask. And so in reply to that, Krishna starts to unfold the principles of yagya in chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita. So he speaks about, the way he speaks about yagya in chapter 3, he speaks about the relationship between human beings and divine entities known as devas or celestials. They're kind of like the cosmic maintainers of the resources of nature. This is like we live in a metropolitan, right? And what happens if we don't pay the water bill? The water cut, so does it just cut off by itself? There's someone behind that cuts it off, right? So for the old world, there's a belief that there are cosmic entities who are the conscious principle behind the resources of nature. And the humans were intended to have a relationship with that conscious principle. And so in order to honor that relationship, there was a principle of yagya between the devas and the humans. I'm just going to use the word devas. And the humans. Oops. I'm not a good speller, but I know how to spell humans. So the currency between the devas and the humans was yagya. This was like the currency between the two. The devas, again, are the conscious principles behind the natural resources of nature. So if you offer yagya to them, and there were like various sorts of ceremonies that were specific to the culture. So that is not very relevant to us now. But there were like very specific ceremonies by which you supplicated and propitiated the devas, or in other words, paid your bills. And then the devas reciprocated by providing the resources of nature. If you didn't pay the bill, so this is our side, we didn't pay the bill, then it's okay. You take that away. So now I'll pay the bill, okay. And so then the relationship is broken because of lack of offering. That is the nature of the relationship. So taking that as representative of all relationships in nature, the principle of yagya is expounded upon in Bhagavad Gita. So the way Krishna speaks about it, I'm going to use another diagram. He refers to the transcendence as the akshara. So the word akshara means the imperishable transcendence, or the first cause that we were talking about, the complete whole or wholeman that encompasses everything. And he says from that cause comes sacred text. So the sacred text is filled with the wisdom for how to relate, how the parts are intended to relate to each other and also relate to that whole that encompasses them. So from the sacred text comes the principles of yagya. how to make different sort of sacrifices. From yagya or offering comes resources. I'm just going to use the word resources. The word that's used in Gita is rain, because rain is an important part of existence, believe it or not. Because from rain comes foodstuffs, grain. So from resources like rain, that's the one that's used as the example in the Gita. From rain comes the food. And from the food comes the human beings. Because when you eat food, the food is transformed into blood, blood is transformed into semen, and in that way the humans are coming. And then humans are continuing to follow the wisdom of the sacred text on how to perform yajna, so that the circle of life may continue. This is why I titled the presentation as Sacrifice Makes the World Go Round. So what is the meaning of love, or what is the meaning of friendship? What is the meaning of any relationship without sacrifice, without giving back? You're taking something, so you have to give back. What is the meaning of any of those ideas unless something is given back? So if you remove the yajna principle, then the resources are taken away. And that way the whole thing starts to fall apart, this kind of idea. So yajna is the principle by which we honor the whole that encompasses us. Now, if you're secular in your thinking, that whole can be a society. Or if you're secular in your thinking, the whole can be your relationship. Because the thing about a relationship with a spouse, it's you and another person falls into themselves, but the relationship is a greater whole that encompasses both of them, right? So that means that in order to maintain that whole that encompasses both the parties, the currency is a yajna in the relationship. Now, for those of us who have had 1 or 2 or 3 relationships, how many of you may, just by a little bit of reflection, can think that, yes, the relationship broke down because we didn't honor the whole that encompassed both of us through the principle of yajna. So this is accessible for a secular thinking. This is not just like, these principles are not unique to a spiritual culture. They can be used or leveraged in the secular thinking as well. So that's just an example of how that might be the case. So there are different types of yajna that are mentioned in the culture. But I'm just going to mention 2 of them, and the last one relates to the chanting that we're doing. So, there was one other thing I'd like to say about that. Anyway, I'll come back to that. So there, in the culture, they talk about what is known as the 5 great yajnas, based on 5 major relationships that we have with entities in this world. 5 great yajnas are there. Number 1, the relationship to the celestials, or the conscious principles behind nature, or if you are more secular in your thinking, just nature herself. You know, there's a relationship with nature herself. Number 2, the rishis. You know this word rishis? You kind of spell it phonetically. Huh? R-I-S-H. The word rishis means like the sages of a culture, those who have lived, those who have embodied wisdom. They're called as rishis. Today we have people who know a lot of things. You've probably seen them on TEDx and YouTube and all that. But the people who like have wisdom are like very few in number. You may have noticed that. Maybe you notice a distinction between people who know something and people who like have wisdom. Did you notice that? Is it apparent? Simon, what do you say? Yeah. Sure. It is apparent. So rishis means wisdom, people who embody the wisdom. And they have written many literatures to help guide the subsequent generations after them. They're called as rishis. Next relationship is relationship with other species of life. This is called as bhutta yajna. The 4th one is a relationship with other human beings. It's called Mara yajna. And the last of the relationships is the relationship that we have with the forefathers. This is a at least for someone like me from the Western world, this one is not always accessible. But we inherit our body from the previous generations. We also inherit our cultural prosperity, although that's not the best example nowadays. But previously, you inherit a cultural prosperity from the forefathers, so you are considered obliged to them also. So as soon as you take birth in this world, these 5 great yagyas are upon you. You have a responsibility to offer something back to all of these personalities. With the rishis, for example, because they give wisdom, the way you offer a yagya to them is by studying their works. That's how you make an offering to those who have left behind their wisdom. You study their work and you try to understand what they're saying and imbibe them. For other species of life, you feed them, you plant trees. There are different types of yagyas that are prescribed. But in any case, the idea is these are the 5 great yagyas to honor the various relationships that sustain us in this world. Understanding that within, these are all parts, and there's a greater whole that encompasses all, and we relate to each other through these yagyas, and that way we maintain one another.
Given that you asked me, what would you say are kind of rishis in today's society, or kind of, let's say, in this part of the world, or what would you say, and are they objective or are they subjective instead of just based on experience?
That's very good. You guys heard the question. Who are the modern rishis or the contemporary rishis of the world? Hold on. Who are the contemporary rishis? You know, it's very hard to say, but I would, if I had to make a case for it, I would say that the rishis, for at least let's talk about the Western world. Let's say the Western world was previously guided by the principles of Christianity, for example. So that means their main rishi would be Jesus Christ. He left the, let's say, the New Testament, or the apostles left the New Testament. So then the contemporary rishis would be those who embody the principles therein. So if you find anyone like that, like after Jesus Christ, there were saints like Saint Francis of Assisi, for example. I just know him because I'm very fascinated by his life, particularly like the Bible. So he seemed to fully embody that which was there in Jesus Christ's teachings. And then he himself left some teachings. So then he becomes a rishi having embodied that wisdom. Then he himself becomes a rishi living future teachings, which can be embodied by future generations. So those who are embodying that wisdom, they will be called as the rishis. So obviously you would have to use your own discernment to ascertain.
But then it's subjective to the culture that you, to some degree.
Yeah, you can say it's subjective to the culture. The way we would articulate it in Bhakti Vedanta cultures is that there is a greater whole or God that encompasses the whole world. And by grace, there are rishis or personalities who emerge in all the cultures in order to give guidance to the humans in that particular culture. This is the most inclusive way of thinking about it. And so you can say it's subjective to the culture, but they're all pointing to a unifying principle. The unifying principle means a whole that encompasses all reality. And ultimately an offering of oneself to that whole, which is the last part that I want to get to here. Because what we're talking about here is the yagyas that we must perform in relationship to each other in this world. But there's a greater whole that encompasses all of these factors. And that greater whole is, of course, the first cause we're talking about. That is source of the source. So there's yagyas that are, I'm going to use these things here. So as I was mentioning just now, there are yagyas for honoring these different relationships in the world, right? As I mentioned, a relationship includes at least two parties, and the relationship itself is a third thing that encompasses them both. So whether it's our relationship with celestials or nature, or just say nature for this one, or it's a relationship with the rishis, that relationship is a third thing that encompasses at least two parties. So we're talking about yagyas in relationship to these different entities in this world. But sacred texts, and I haven't studied other literature, so I don't like to talk about other literatures exactly, but leveraging my understanding from Vedanta, there's a yagya to honor the whole that encompasses everything. That means taking the word yagya as sacrifice or offering. There's a yagya to offer oneself to God, or the offering to the first cause of things, or to source. And that yagya, as far as I can tell, is what religions try to point to. You know, I think sometimes we have different definitions of God also, so that's another sort of conversation. But let's say for granted, they're working with a similar idea of God as the reality that encompasses everything. Then they're speaking to largely a type of yagya that honors God, that offers oneself back to God. And if you offer oneself to the whole that encompasses everything, then within that offering, you're acknowledging all the other relationships also. They're not excluded within that. Just as if you water the root of the tree, that all the different leaves and the branches get nourished by that water. Or if you eat food, if you offer the food to the stomach, then all the different parts of the body get nourished by that. So by the offering to God, source, divine, then all these relationships are themselves taken care of. So although there's a subjective quality to the presentations given by different rishis, given that they're pointing to a reality that encompasses everything, if you're able to make that offering and commune with that reality, then in that sense, they share universal quality or oneness or sameness in that sense. And this is a yagya that is often most recommended in our literature also. So the Hare Krishna mantra, coming to that part, the Hare Krishna mantra is known as the Sankirtan Yagya. We have this one here. Sankirtana. So Sankirtana, the word Kirtana here means to bring glory to, or bring attention to a higher order of reality. So that higher order of reality being the reality that encompasses us all, that is God or Krishna. And Yagya means offering. So the idea is that through the actions of singing about God, or writing about God, or performing works that directs people's attention towards that reality, that is known as Sankirtan. So even if you are an artist, but your art is to direct people's attention towards a higher order of reality, that is also known as Sankirtan. You'll find this is, if you ever get a chance to do any of the pilgrimages that Bhakti Center offers, especially if you go to South India where the culture is still very much preserved, you'll see in the temples in South India, the temples are the center of the village or the center of the town. And all the culture surrounding it is about bringing attention to the deity who lives in the center of the town. So their artwork is about it, their music is about it, their clothing is about everything centered on that. And that's all a form of Sankirtan or offering to that higher order of reality. This is called the Sankirtan. So what we were doing in the beginning, Hare Krishna mantra, Hare Krishna is a name for a God or source or divine, or whatever you want to say. And by bringing attention or glory to that source, it is a type of offering oneself to that whole that encompasses us all. And in this way, we can bring about a transformation in our own lives and the lives of the world around us. So that's kind of the sentence. Okay. So do you have a follow-up question? Some more questions is there? No. I'm going to pause there and take some comments or questions, some reflections so far for me hearing here. Yes.
You said you had a point about the demon Akshara, and then you said you get that.
So we mentioned that the Akshara, the transcendence, the word Akshara literally means imperishable. So it's a word for the transcendence, the imperishable transcendence. So if you study that section of Gita that I was referring to, he mentions there that the transcendence is situated in the acts of yajna. So this is the reason why yajna keeps relationships together. Because it is a form of honoring the reality that keeps things together. So he says in any action where there is sacrifice, it doesn't even have to be directly sacrifice for God. But in any action where there is sacrifice, he says the transcendent is situated in that act of sacrifice. I say probably for this reason, when you watch a movie, because we like to watch movies, right? You watch a movie where someone has sacrificed himself for a greater good, for example, then you find it very endearing, beautiful even though it constitutes a loss or something. So we say that's because God is situated in that act. Even the guy wasn't doing it for God, or even he wasn't really aware of God, but just in the action of sacrifice, the Akshara or the imperishable is situated. And that is the principle that keeps everything bound together. But in the act where everyone's just taking without offering anything back, so the transcendence isn't there, so things fall apart. As I mentioned already with the example of the yellow lotus flower, these qualities like form, shapes, scent, they don't have any direct relationship with each other. They only relate to each other through the lotus flower. So the effects or the parts, we don't have any direct relationships with one another. We only are able to relate to one another through the acknowledgement of the whole that encompasses us. So that means our relationships with each other as friends or with spouses or with nature has to have a principle that acknowledges the whole that encompasses us. Now, for those who have a more secular disposition towards reality, they may not be able to keep God in the center, for example, but they have to keep sacrifice in the center in order for their relationship to be maintained. And I feel that this is one of the big difficulties that modern generations we have a hard time with. In the old world, they had things like gender roles, for example. Now, I'm not saying I'm into gender roles, so don't bite my head off or anything. But I'm just saying, when there was like a gender role, it was clear that this is the sort of sacrifice I have to do according to my position, and this is the sort of sacrifice you have to do according to your position. And in that way, the honoring of the sacrifice keeps a relationship together. Maybe it wasn't always beautiful and sweet. I don't know. That's a whole nother ballpark. But it keeps a relationship together in principle. Whereas when that starts to fall apart, people don't acknowledge what is their responsibility in a relationship. Then it falls apart. So that was the principle we're saying. The upfooter has to be there. Because the word upfooter means imperishable. So if you want the relationship with anything to be imperishable, then the imperishable is situated in the act of sacrifice. So it is that what allows a relationship to be imperishable or beautiful in that sense. So that was the point that I meant to say for that solution. Yep.
Yeah, we'd like to talk about the issue is very much like this, but we decide
Prabhupada, yeah, of course, that speaks to his point also, is it subjective, like for a culture, that this person is a Rishi, that person is a Rishi. Honestly, those who are able to embody a higher reality principle that is obviously has an empirical quality to it, you could actually see someone embodying something that you appreciate. If you weren't able to see it, you wouldn't appreciate them as a Rishi. So there's an empirical quality to it, that they're embodying some higher order principle that you appreciate. And seeing that, then you accept that this person is a Rishi. And therefore you decide to hear from them. And when you hear from them, when you allow your mind to meditate on what they're teaching, and you try to make that teaching as a part of yourself, that's a form of yajna, or honoring that relationship. Otherwise, many times we hear from teachers, like, especially like nowadays, because teaching has become like a spectacle, like everything. Everything's like a spectacle. You know, if you go to Instagram, the teaching is also a spectacle. So people hear things from teachers and they get inspired by that, but they don't necessarily meditate on it and try to make that teaching a part of themselves. It's like, yeah, I'm inspired. And then this is often a problem when teachers come to like, even in the spiritual space, you're intended to be like entertaining and, you should have your jokes lined up like, oh, yeah, man. And then the next thing, and you say your jokes, it's like the space is intended to be like very entertaining because there isn't a relationship of yajna between the two parties. On the one hand, the teacher is thinking about how I'm going to uplift the mindset of the audience, of the people that I'm speaking to. And the people who are hearing are thinking how I'm going to learn something by which I can be uplifted. So that relationship is a relationship of yajna, it's imperishable. But otherwise, a natural relationship in modern time, contemporary time, is very like a spectacle. And so things fall apart. So in this way, the relationship is not maintained. Okay. Any other comment or question? What time is it? We can break out into a group. We want to hear 12, 10. We went? Yeah.
I was just thinking about sort of looking at the world around us, thinking about this sort of yajna and sacrifice, and particularly in the US, as we kind of start leaning more and more into our individualism, people less and less willing to give up for someone they know, but less willing to give up for someone they don't know. But that's someone they don't know is how society kind of holds together, right? And we're not necessarily as willing to make that sacrifice as I think they were generations ago, where the lady would like look out the window and like be like, sorry, mama, you need to go back in. This thing held society together, which was our agreement almost to be willing to sacrifice for each other. Now, maybe I'll do it with my partner, but. So it seems like I'm following that thread to sort of help contribute to the center, but as a society, then we're not willing to. Sacrifice.
Right. So you remember from the Akshara comes the sacred text of any given culture. Or you can say, instead of sacred text, you can say the metaphysical principles by which people allow themselves to be governed. So every old culture had a set of metaphysical principles that were derived usually from some sacred book, if not from like discourse and some sort of arena where there was debate. There was a sacred text that actually guided the values of society. So as our relationship with sacred texts or metaphysics in general has become increasingly distant, then our ability to follow principles that are also integrative. Is that a word? Integrative? I sometimes make up words, but they kind of work.
Integrated or as in have integrity?
Both, but as an integrated. Specific as in, because remember we said that the function of a wholeland is to self-assert its individuality on the one hand, and on the other hand, to serve its function as a part of the greater whole. So it has a dual function. And the yajna is supposed to acknowledge both aspects, where you're doing an action that not only helps you, but it also simultaneously acknowledges that service to the greater whole that you're part of. So usually there were a set of metaphysical principles that guided people's thinking around that. And as we become increasingly distant from metaphysics in general, people don't think about metaphysics that much anymore. Like we only think about the issues at hand. For example, I'll give a very popular one in the West, racism. You know, that's everyone thinks about racism and also racism, but where are the metaphysics that underpin a thinking that leads to someone being racist, for example, or this ism or that ism? Where are the metaphysics behind that? Have you ever thought about that? The metaphysics that governs a mind that allows it to be like that. If you don't deal with that issue on a metaphysical level, you can't really solve the issue whatsoever. Because the thinking is metaphysical, like literally not physical, metaphysical, like underneath the physical. So it's literally not physical. So if you don't solve it on the metaphysical level, you can't really solve it whatsoever. It's just like if you go to India, one thing that happens to a lot of people go to India. Okay, I probably shouldn't have said this because I'm not trying to scare you, but a lot of things that happens to people that go to India, they get boils from eating something that's not proper, or the water in India is out of control. So you get like a little bit wrong water, you know, you brush your teeth, you just do, or something, and then what happens? Some like poison comes in the blood, basically. And from the poison in the blood, you develop boils in the body. So you can cut the boil off. It's very painful, but you can cut it off. But unless you remove the poison in the blood, the boils keep coming to the surface. So you have to remove the blood, the poison in the blood. So I say the poison in the blood is in our metaphysics, which we're not, everyone has a sort of metaphysics by default, but a metaphysics that's well thought out and engaged with is probably not the standard. So as a result of that, it causes someone to be someone like racist, for example. So like is consciousness the body, or is consciousness more than just the body? Are we something else altogether? These are like metaphysical questions. So there's usually a set of metaphysics that allow people to do the sacrifices for other people because it was the principle. It wasn't that, oh, I knew you, I have a relationship with you. No, it's the principle. My metaphysics governs me to do so. But as we become more distant from this, then it becomes hard for people to work out what those principles are. Of course, because a lot of the population is not necessarily like, we're not rishis, a lot of us, so we do need guidance in that area. And so if we don't get the guidance in that area, then that principle of sacrifice connected to the metaphysics just completely falls away. And it becomes very difficult for us to function in society. Thank you for that comment. Okay, what I had from Rajrani's suggestion is that we can break out into small groups. And I wanted to get you guys to engage with the subject matter of yajna with one another for like 10 minutes or so, 10 minutes or 15 minutes or so. And then we'll come back at the end and we want to hear reflections from everyone about their own thinking around this particular subject matter. Is that okay? Do I do like a 1-2 and 1-2 and 1-2, or you can just choose your own groups?
What size groups are you?
Probably no more than 3. It could be 2 people also, at least 2 people. It should be at least a partner.
Two each.
2 each. So y'all want to choose yourself, or you want to do the 1, 2, 1, 2?
How we do someone next to?
Okay. All right.
The question is just our thoughts on that. This is like, what's the question?
No, the question is on meditations on the importance and the role of yajna in the maintenance. So just reflection, your own personal reflections, and putting pressure on each other's thinking, and then bringing that to the table.
Conversation.
Do you get the prompt? I missed it. The prompt is, what is sacrifice? And how important is it in maintaining the relationships that we have with ourselves, others, with nature, with society? Just reflecting on bringing in some of these elements.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like when these conversations. Yeah, just like.
Yeah.
Oh, so there's that.
Yeah, well, that is like, okay.
So it's more about.
Maybe there's some. Maybe there's some.
Yeah, it does. And like, it establishes for you. So it's helping like. Right now, it's.
Sorry.
Yeah. I think it's very
So you can go back. Because I would think that their culture is that it's
Sure. Yeah. Maybe it was.
I mean, I definitely agree. Like, I really were saying. Yeah, it's like a different world, you know, like seeing like classes. Like, I don't know, things like that. You know, planning, like, how would be up like this. You know, things like that.
I think that. I wouldn't say.
I'm so proud of you for doing that. You're so amazing. Especially Yeah. So I guess, you know, I don't know like how those for me. You know, there's what's our that's how it started. I wasn't, but just like randomly, like if I've been walking. Yes, I can talk about it.
And I have it in part.
And then, yeah, that's kind of what it was. I was randomly just curious. Hard, like, I talked just whenever I see, like,
Ring, 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 ring. Maybe another minute. Another minute or two. Ring, 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 ring.
It's like very open and touches on something.
Yeah.
You know, tradition, you just get to talk so.
Which I don't like
Yeah.
Ring, 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 ring. Ring, 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 ring.
Bye.
Ring, 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 ring. Ring. Okay, let's go around and hear some reflections from your engagement with one another. And we are. Sorry.
No. I think there's like one thing that came up is like it's not like something that I was brought up with this concept of sacrifice and reciprocating.
I join you in that.
Yeah, and but like it's not like the first time these ideas have come to me, but I'm glad you brought it up today. It's good to reinforce this sort of a perspective and give me new ideas and how I can integrate that more into my life and my perspective and my relationship with others, with other beings, special beings, all sorts of beings.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, no, I think one thing that for me is interesting is that we sort of agree that it might be easier to do sacrifice in terms of direct personal relationships than more distant concepts in a way. I mean, also like in the environment, like how easy is it to live in New York and to be in a harmonious relationship with your environment?
Very good. Yeah, interesting. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's interesting. Anyone has a reflection on that? How do we live in the city and be harmonious with nature?
We talked about that.
Really? Let's hear it. Let's hear something.
We were talking about sort of more indigenous and other sort of cultures or sacrifice or getting something and giving it back. You sacrifice, the harvest, this and that. And there are, you can see in New York in particular, in cities, there are spiritual practices that people are beginning to do that are that bring that into sort of their homes. And that's part of that. That's where I come from. So that's the background of where these forces of nature are actually what are sort of regularly provisioned ways in which people are doing that in the city. It is certainly more difficult, but it's a practice.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was thinking about that, like growing up in America, when we would see like TV shows of like indigenous cultures, the presentation of them was always like, oh, they don't know what's up. It's kind of like primitive and maybe a little bit unsophisticated. But now in light of like new insight, you're like, oh, wait a minute, maybe we're the ones that are a little bit off, in our relationship with nature specifically, and our attempt to like triumph over nature instead of like harmonious with her. Yeah, I've been thinking about that a lot more recently in a particular context, which I'm not sure about.
We talked about many things. That being one of them. We also talked about kind of like we went from talking about indigenous cultures and how they have processes for things, and we were kind of just like, how did that kind of stuff? And we were talking about industrialization, and how messy it's gotten because it's really like replaced the goal or the purpose of society. When you look back at religion for all of its problems that it's had, the goal was very different, right? The goal was like God, hell, heaven, whatever. And then when industrialization started to come into the picture and things started to get more secularized, the goal kind of got replaced. And we were talking about how like even nowadays, like people, we were both brought up in kind of Christian backgrounds, but even nowadays, it's like I still have a lot of friends that identify as Christian. It's kind of just like this side thing that you're kind of into, but kind of not. Your parents maybe this, whatever. But really, the purpose of my life, or the goal of my life, is like I have to pay bills, I have to make money, I have to be somebody, all this stuff. And so I feel like that has really taken us away from any sort of idea of sacrifice at all, because we're just, in this industrial mindset. And we were also asking this question of like, how do, we were talking about how nice it is to have a space like this, because the question came up like, how do you come back from that in a sense? Because it seems like a very far off place to be where it concretized so much as an individualist, secular, it's, just for me kind of mentality. So I was really appreciating this space that we have.
Amazing reflections. share something?
Yeah, we talked about how sacrifice can be looked at like internally, but also externally, and how these also relate. So things like self-control and prayer, and sticking with practices and things like that. And also, I was thinking about how especially that point really resonated with me of like thinking of sacrifice, you being willing to do that even for people you don't know. That's really something really important for me, and things that, and something that I choose to observe in the city, and seeing how people do that in small ways, and appreciating that a lot more. And also we were just talking about how those relationships or friendships with people where there's the whole isn't acknowledged, it's just very unsatisfying. It's just so, it's like, there's so much more we can be talking about right now, and like acknowledging, this beauty that we're here together, and it's like part of something bigger than us. Like it's something so special and potent that you can tap into, and like so many people don't have that experience. And it's like special to be in this place and find people that acknowledge that.
I was thinking in relation to the industrialization point also, like you get together with, like New York, you have to literally schedule people in. Like literally. Like, hey, you want to hang? Okay, well, let me see. There's some time in June on Monday at 5 o'clock between 5 and 5:20. It's like.
It's not scheduled, it's not happening.
Yeah. So and then finally you like meet your friend, and then you go and meet them, and they're like on their phone. And that's just like an example of where like a simple sacrifice of let's be with each other and each other's presence would do a lot. We're losing that sort of thing. Imposition of like industrialism. Like that. Tanjali?
Yeah, I mean, May put it so beautifully. I think she hit on a lot of points that we talked about. I think touching on something you just said, sacrifice really brings depth to our relationships. And, we talked about different forms of sacrifice, again, going back to internally and externally, but also time and your energy is a great form of sacrifice. Again, going back to your scheduling, and just something that May was really intrigued by is sacrifice in loving relationships. And what does that look like? And in what mood are we doing it in? Are we doing it just because we expect things from someone else? Or are we doing it selflessly because we genuinely care? Because outwardly that sacrifice could be there, but it's just like, well, why are you doing it? And touching on Kishore's point, I think that was so cool about industrialization. And I thought that, self-sufficiency, then sacrifice for a greater purpose. So, yeah.
Also, the illusion of self-sufficiency.
Right, totally.
So, what did we talk about? We spoke about you drew first with like a cycle, like you were like sacred gas, resource, sacred gas offering resources, you would be food with it, you would be taxes, we spoke about that a little bit. And then we also reflected on like the 5 different yakias, which is like on specific species, you can get plant, you can be like maternal, sibling, like whatever. Then what else? The forefathers, which is like the ancestors, obviously you can inherit some part of them.
Yeah, part of that one also, I didn't mention it, but for the forefathers one of the big yogis mentioned for that is to have children, to honor your forefathers, because they've given you this civilization or culture. And so in order to honor them and continue the culture, you're supposed to have children. So that's another just interesting mentality that came up. Like nowadays it's like, well, if I love the person, then we have children. There's like this whole other element to it. Like, you have ancestors that you have to honor and respect for giving you what you have. very interesting.
Wow. Yeah, and then like the rishis, like reading reading the sacred text or. Last one, I was like, yeah, for me, it's like the ones that you can offer, like,
Yeah, coming back to Samuel's point, the more abstract it gets, the harder it is to feel like a connection to the principle with abstract entities. But when the rain doesn't come, it'll feel a lot less abstract.
And then
You know, in Sanskrit, we have what's called the threefold miseries. You heard this before? Threefold miseries? You never heard this before. You've heard threefold miseries. We all experience threefold miseries. The prominent one is miseries caused by the body and mind. Adhyatmika klesha. You have this one, right? On the regular, you have this one, especially that mind. As soon as you wake up, the mind just starts. That's called adhyatmika klesha. The misery is caused by other living beings. That's called adibhotika klesha. Bed-bug, spiders, politicians, and so on. This is called adibhotika klesha. Misery is caused by other. And the last one is called aditaivika klesha, which means misery is caused by nature. That's how we normally articulate it. Although aditaivika klesha means misery is caused by the devas. That's what it literally means. Aditaivika klesha. Misery is caused by the devas because you've not given yajna, so they make some trouble for you. Some floods, some droughts, and this and that. They look like calamities of nature.
I have a question then, like, in like this renovation, like I know like the people say like offer flowers, water, but like, what do you think is the best way to do that? Because like, it's not like you're asking to wait. It's like you speak.
Well, I have my opinion about that. We'll come to that. Let's hear what that's to say.
Yes, I think we were also talking about how they're, very, sometimes very alone, spiritual people that don't get their knowledge from like social media or outside influences. They're just born. They're just born on a particular path. Like they're not confused about, oh, what should I do? It's almost like they're born with this. It's like an internal understanding, and that's kind of like they're almost saint-like. It's like we speak to them and they just know they have this understanding. And I mean, I've come across a few people like that. It's just just their knowledge. It's within. It's not external.
I like to look at those as embodiments or archetypes of our own potentiality. Otherwise, we'll not give ourselves a chance to step into such a powerful archetype. Everyone has the potential as consciousness to commune with a higher order of reality, however they understand what that means. But we have what they call them as limiting beliefs. They said they use that language, limiting beliefs. So I think the mystics of any tradition give a reminder of potentiality in all souls. And if we are able to link to those archetypes, just like now, there are people out there that can tell you everything about all the characters of Game of Thrones. They have like fandom, they call them fandoms, like pages for all this stuff. That means they really like meditate on these characters and their lineages and their histories and their teachings, and then they go do cosplay, and then they dress up as this person. So there's something to that as a principle of allowing your mind to enter into these archetypes and like really step into that. So I kind of look at them as like holding that space or that archetype, which create a potentiality within all of us. Otherwise, every generation needs a few mystics at least to help it grow and move forward.
Is it the belief system of I mean, even with Krishna, isn't it like very highly evolved souls? Kind of like
In a category of their own.
no, but they're also at the end of the life and death cycle.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
But that's a potential we all have. So we can,
Oh yeah, well, we're all in different. There's different degrees and different.
absolutely.
I might be like 5,000 years away. Who knows? Hopefully
Absolutely.
not.
All right, Russ, I'm good.
Yeah, so we kind of focus our conversations on the diagram of like the whole and the whole arc that you had drawn. One of the things that we spoke about was how the idea of sacrifice of like a relationship needs sacrifice, but how that kind of the underlying attribute is like our identity with that relationship. So I don't have a partner, so I don't have the idea of that sacrifice in a loving relationship or in that way of being dependent or someone being dependent on me, that kind of relationship. I have a different relationship with society or relationships at work or something like that. So we have this underlying idea of our own identity that with different people, different kind of identities we have, and based on all the different identities that we identify ourselves as, we sacrifice depending on that differently. And the idea is to kind of figure out our truest identity and have that, because in our truest identity, truest form, we are permanent, and cultivate that relationship with the truest identity, with the truest sacrifice, which would be the same.
I was thinking about how like two hierarchies to respect at least one being more material like whole. You know, it's not the best whole or the most complete whole, but the material whole, and then the complete whole. And I was thinking about like so I've been reading the Upanishad, which Ani now told me that's
the first.
yeah, because I wasn't paying attention to the Sanskrit, but I was reading over like the past week. It's been helping me while I was with family, big time. And I was connected, and it sort of popped in my head that maybe that's what the spiritual material. There's like I think a few mantras down the road. There's one about like you have to respect spiritual material, and then like not maybe something you have to be happy. I don't know.
Right.
But maybe, but yeah, as that like got to mind that there's like maybe like kind of the body has like some like hierarchy with respect to earth, and then the living entity has this hierarchy to respect to God. Yeah, think about that.
Nice, well said. You guys are all rishis in your own way. It's articulate. So your question, what is your name? Art? Archit. We introduce everyone in the beginning. So. Answer your question and connecting to what Raj just completed with. There's a hierarchy of the truest self in relationship to God. So the idea there is if that relationship is honored, then because that is the reality, the transcendence is the reality that encompasses everything. So by honoring that relationship, that other relationships can be satisfied. So with that kind of understanding, I say that the best yagya is Sankirtan yagya, the yagya which gives glorification to the reality that encompasses all. Whether it's the chanting that we do, or the art that we do, or the writing that we do, or the science or philosophy that you do, all of it that can direct consciousness toward a higher order reality, that's the best yagya. And it could take on different shapes. So with that in mind, we're going to close out with a little small kirtan, and then we're going to have a little snack. There's a little snack there.
Lunch.
Oh, it's a lunch.
It's more than snack.
Oh, more than a snack. We have a meal for you all. So we'll start with this. Close it out with a little kirtan. Sankirtan. So while you're in the street, you can do Sankirtan also. You can probably do a little bit to yourself, otherwise you will get a little nervous. The city can be a crazy space, so this is Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna,
Together. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. One more. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna one more time together. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Jai.
Victory.
All right, thank you all very much for coming and participating today. May you all live a life of happiness,